Hi there, this is Gary Fong, and I wanted to explain um, digital black and white photography. A lot of photographers, quite frankly, do digital black and white photography conversions wrong, as do many of the cameras, and so I'd like to show you the fix and the cure. Now, the first image I want to show you is a color image that was taken with a digital camera, and then using two different methods of digital color to black and white conversion. I'll show you the difference between what's done properly and what's done incorrectly. Now, that image on the middle is done correctly. Now, one could argue that the one on the right actually looks like it has more impact or more pop, and some people actually would prefer that, which is fine. The one on the right is just more contrasty, and I'd like to point you to something very, very important. If you look at the groom's tuxedo, you'll see that you can't find where his arm separates from the rest of his torso. In fact, you can't see any of the detail at all in his tuxedo, and that's called loss of mid-range tone. That's when the contrast is so great that the grays start to turn into black. And when you do this enough, the best way that I can explain it is when you have too much contrast, it's like coloring with um, 8 different shades of gray charcoal rather than, say, 64 different shades of gray charcoal. So you start to lose three-dimensionality. You start to lose the ability to differentiate a lot of detail. For example, look at the bride's dress. On the middle one, you can actually see all the detail in the torso, but on the one on the right, you start to lose a lot of that, and a lot of it just turns into a big white splotch, and that's loss of mid-range tone. So in other words, when we convert from black and white to color, we want to increase the mid-range tone, which means not so much to decrease the contrast, because the contrast is the same throughout the photo. The whites are equally white, the blacks are equally black. The problem with a high contrast image is it turned most of the grays into black, and therefore it loses a lot of detail. That's really important for wedding photography, because in wedding photography, say for example, you're taking a picture of a cake, the cake cutting, and the cake is, say, 3 feet closer to you and completely white with detail than the bride and groom, which are further back, and he's wearing all black and she's wearing all white. So the camera will typically try to expose more for that cake that's in the front, thereby throwing the couple into darkness. Now, contrast makes darks darker and whites whiter. So obviously, if you have a high contrast situation, you'll get the cake exposed correctly, but then the bride and groom will disappear into the background. In a lower contrast situation, I'm not lower contrast, in a deeper mid-range tone kind of situation, you'll actually open up the mid-range tones, and then the bride and groom behind will actually look a lot less blown into darkness. So the one in the middle is correct, and I want to take you to the next topic, which is the different methods of converting black and white to color. Now, I'll give you a little bit of just a straight out clue here. Typically, most cameras, when they shoot in black and white mode, and the only one that I've seen that actually does a really good job of shooting black and whites native when you turn it to black and white mode, was a long departed Fuji S2. That camera was actually a grayscale type of camera. The problem with most cameras is when you shoot in monochrome mode, so when you go into your settings and turn it into black and white or monochrome mode, it actually does what's called a desaturation. And desaturation is a huge loss of mid-range tones. I'm just going to pull up right now real quick a uh, color to black and white conversion done through a Photoshop technique called desaturation. Now, desaturation, I'd say, is what 9 out of 10 people do when converting color to black and white. Now, Adobe's done some really cool things with the later versions of CS, having an actual black and white mode under mode correction, but the way to really get the most mid-range tones is through a method called lab color, and that's kind of a little bit out of the topic of the range of this video, but I'll probably get into it in another video. Um, so having said that, I want to show you this desaturated Macbeth image. And you'll notice when you take a look at it, you see these numbers here that are all around. Those numbers are actually the 0 to 255 representation of how light or dark it is. So on a scale of 255, 0 being completely black, 255 being completely white, I'm showing you the difference, I mean the numerical value of the relative brightness of those squares. And in a simple desaturation, you'll notice that many of these squares, the ones that I'm pointing to right here, uh, these are identical, and these guys right here are also identical. And so when you take a look at these numbers, you'll notice that what used to be uh, clearly distinguishable in a color photograph becomes identical in a very dull looking desaturated grayscale um, conversion. I'm sorry, desaturation conversion. And that's incorrect. Now, I'll just show you real quick. This image here is done on Channel Mixer, and then now I'll put the two side by side, and you can see the completely different ability to pick up shades of gray in using the index color method. So in short, I just want to say two tips out of this. Number one, when you shoot your camera in black and white mode, it will tend to look more like the desaturation mode, which is kind of a no-no. Number two, when you're in Photoshop and you want to convert to black and white, don't use the simple desaturation method.